With great power comes responsibility. Do whatever that you want to your best ability. And there is nothing that's impossible with possibility. I am possibly the hero that nobody knew they knew.
Welcome everybody. I'm Danny Myers-Frierson. I am a writer for the Northern Agent. I would like to take the time to thank Hartford Public Access and the Northern Agent for sponsoring this very important mayoral interview with Mr. Arunan. So please, let's take the time to just give the viewers a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure. I have a wife and 5 kids, 5 small kids. Our oldest is 10, our youngest is 2, and we live in a neighborhood in the Frog Hollow neighborhood in Hartford, right near the corner of Park and Broad Street. And we've got the only single-family home on our street in a neighborhood that's got a 7% home ownership rate. And so I go to work every day at the Hartford Land Bank, which is this organization that was created by the city of Hartford to take vacant and blighted properties and to convert them to get them back on tax rolls quickly. But my goal since I've come there has been to create this program that trains Hartford residents to redevelop those properties, so that as we're pouring money into redeveloping our neighborhoods, especially Hartford residents are at the center of that, building wealth for themselves, building businesses for themselves, and then turning as many of those properties as we can into home ownership. We've got the lowest home ownership rate in the state of Connecticut, 24%, and it's obviously in neighborhoods like mine and many neighborhoods around the city in the single digits. And so our goal is to build wealth, both in the redevelopment of those properties and then in the home ownership that comes off the back end of those properties. Before that, I was in the Lamont administration at the Department of Consumer Protection, and before that, I was a lawyer at a firm downtown, Updike, Kelly & Spelcy.
Okay. So 5 children.
Yeah.
Are you okay? Is your wife okay?
Good questions.
Okay.
We're a little crazy, I guess. Yeah, we've got 5 kids, 10, 9, twin 8-year-olds, and then a little 2-year-old. The 4 older ones all go to public school here in Hartford. Mm-hmm. My wife is a minister at Center Church downtown in Hartford. So we've got a crazy, loud household. We've got a lot of energy, and I've got a lot of door knockers with me.
Good, very good. Why is it so important that you are a resident of Broad Street, and why is it important for you to be among the people?
Well, to me, all of the potential of our city, I mean, I can tell you as somebody who wants to be mayor, all of the potential of our city, I think, resides in our residents. I think we have all the tools we need right here in the city within the people and the ingenuity of the people and the creativity and the potential of those people to be the answers to all of the challenges we have. And I can see firsthand, day to day, the way in which disinvestment in communities like mine has led us down this pathway in which we are constantly hand-to-mouth and communities are hand-to-mouth, and working so hard for these paychecks that 93% of my neighbors are paying in rent to some landlord, many of whom live out of the state of Connecticut, millions of dollars leaving our city, leaving our state, that could be used to generate wealth here. Right. And I really believe in investment in residents, but it's personal to me because I'm raising a family. We've got a really diverse, multi-ethnic family. My oldest daughter is African. The son is half black, half Puerto Rican. We've got 2 kids who are biological, who are mixed race. Our youngest is West Indian. There's really very few communities that capture that mix of diversity and that culture, and there's such a richness and vibrancy, I think, that comes from it. And it's a great neighborhood. I love our neighborhood. I love neighborhoods across the north end of Hartford that have such rich cultural vibrancy and such great potential. And that's the core of what I dream of when I dream of a fully invested city, is taking those neighborhoods and those people and seeing what we can create if we invest in that, and we really push to have build investment in black and brown families here in the city.
So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Black and brown families, right?
Yeah.
So you and I talked a little bit off camera about my background. I like to call myself a daughter of the North End because my entire community raised me. From Gillette Street, where my mom When she came from Mount Sinai, that's where we lived, 82 Gillette Street. 1988, ending of the crack era, right?
Yeah.
And then Enfield Street.
Mm-hmm.
When she moved from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 12 years old, she lived on Enfield Street.
Mm.
It does not look how it looked back then.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, my Nana used to own her house on Enfield Street.
Yeah.
After time, you know, people come asking to buy their houses, right? And the trees that used to be there are no longer there, that used to produce maple syrup and things of that nature, right?
Yeah.
I remember putting my hand in the tree and touching it and getting in trouble because sap will be on my hands.
Yeah.
How do we give back to those people that lost their property because of hard times and having to sell?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it right now with families that are getting older, and I've talked to so many people on Garden Street, on Enfield Street, on Capon, on Cleveland Ave, who are holding on to homes that have been theirs for decades. In some cases, homes that have been theirs for a generation or two when they were the first black family on that street, and people call them every single week. Right. Looking to buy their homes, and there's a reason that people are looking to buy those homes, because there's value. We have so much value in the land here in Hartford, and yet we as a community own so little of that land, and it becomes really hard once that land gets sold to a private investor to then get it back in the community. And so, I think we need to create the opportunities for people to stay where they are. And have a fund for some of the older folks in our neighborhoods who are having trouble staying in their home, to be able to fix up their home and keep it in better condition to deal with some of the property tax issues for homeowners, especially homeowners in Blue Hills and Northeast and Clay Arsenal and parts of the South End that are really just struggling to make their property tax payments as it is already right now. And then we've got to create new capital for a new generation of folks growing up in this city to live and build equity where they are and invest in the city. And so one of the things that I proposed is we're getting, when cannabis establishments open in the city of Hartford, we will get the first new source of revenue the city's really ever gotten since property taxes. And instead of allowing those dollars to get gobbled up in the general fund, I want to create a separate fund that's just for Hartford residents to tap into to build home ownership or start businesses in formerly redlined neighborhoods in our city, to build the kind of lines of capital that have been accessible to other people in other neighborhoods since the GI Bill, and have been the source of building wealth in all of those neighborhoods, but have been unavailable for people in redlined neighborhoods in the city of Hartford for generations. I want to create that capital to allow for people to build that investment so that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we don't have these same conversations, so that the people who are growing up in the city now are able to build a life here and build wealth here and own the land around us and have control of what our city looks like.
Absolutely. Why do you want to be mayor, and why should the people trust and believe you?
I want to be mayor because I believe in what is possible in our city and in our residents, and what is possible if we can invest in our own residents and our own neighborhoods. And I've been doing that work at the Land Bank. We've created this program that's the first of its kind in the nation. It's a national model, and other cities now are coming to Hartford to look at what we're doing, because we have flipped on its head kind of the economics around housing in cities like Hartford, and instead of relying on either big out-of-state, out-of-town developers or a big nonprofit to do the development, we are saying we believe that the residents of the city of Hartford have all the tools they need to do this. If we can provide bridge some skills learning, if we can provide them access to capital, and if we can trust them to be at the center of the redevelopment of their own neighborhoods, if they can. The city residents of Hartford can rebuild their own neighborhoods home by home, and to me, I view what I would do as mayor as an expansion of that. That if we can reimagine an economic system in which every resident has access to the opportunity to build the kind of city they want to build, has access to the opportunity to start small businesses in commercial corridors along Albany Ave and Upper Main Street and Park Street and Franklin Ave and Barber Street that have at some point along the journey of the city of Hartford at one point had been thriving commercial corridors for small businesses and are not now. Right. If we can allow Hartford residents the opportunity to rebuild businesses there, I think those areas can thrive. If we can allow Hartford residents the ability to own homes, and most people who are renting right now in the city of Hartford a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment are paying more than I'm paying in my mortgage. So people can own homes, and maybe not everybody can be a homeowner, but a lot more than 24% of this population can be homeowners in the city. And if we can allow people those avenues to build generational wealth, then we have a fundamentally different economic system 20 or 25 years from now. And I think a lot of politicians have come through cities like Hartford for generations talking about solutions to fix the holes that exist today. Mm-hmm. And that's good because, I mean, it's important because we've got real challenges today. We've got real urgent challenges in front of us. But, I think that my hope is that I can bring a vision, and that working with communities together, we can produce a vision of what Hartford could look like 20 years from now, 25 years from now, and a Hartford that breaks the mold of other cities, that doesn't go through this wave of gentrification and pricing people out of their homes and the places they live and have lived for generations, that instead invests in people and human beings and creates the wealth for people to rise with the tide that comes to Hartford. It allows people to be at the center of that revitalization of our neighborhoods and that economic revitalization, and to build wealth for themselves and for their families over the course of that.
Okay. What would you say, so you said that there are a number of things that are emergent when it comes to the community. How would you rank the emergent level? What is most important?
A number of things that are urgent, like urgent kind of issues in the community?
Yes. And specifically the ones that are urgent that your campaign and your platform will support.
Sure. I think the one we see just in our face all summer long is gun violence. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I think we've got to be really proactive about and get on top of before the summers come. But also something that I don't think we can police our way or wrest our way out of. And I know I differ with some of my opponents on that, but what my proposal has been, there's a few proposals I have. One is to create an Office of Violence Prevention so that we are coordinating efforts between the various nonprofits that work in the field of violence prevention, but also our schools and our police, to identify those who are most at risk and coming up with unified plans to deal with the population that has experienced violence and experienced massive trauma recently, that is likely to offend or reoffend, and coordinate our effort to prevent violence before it happens. I also want to keep our neighborhood schools open at night and then all summer long, to give kids a safe space to be after the school day is over and after the school year is over. I think for so many of our kids, and as a parent, I know this, just sorting out a summer schedule or an after-school schedule can be really, really difficult and also really costly. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have the resources for that, it's really difficult to know where your kid is going to be during the summer, during the most violent months of the year. And if we can invest in real sports and rec programs in every single neighborhood, and music and arts education, and a school that can be a hub in each community that allows kids a safe place to be, so they don't have to be on the streets each night, or they don't have to be on the streets over the summer, or if their parents are working long hours or working multiple jobs, they don't have to worry about where their kid is because they know their kid is somewhere safe with adults. I think it can create the resources to prevent violence. And we talk so much about our approach to violence in communities like this, in a framework of punishing those who've committed violence. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a reason that there's violence and gun violence in these kinds of numbers in Hartford in a way that there isn't in a Glastonbury or an Avon or Simsbury. And it's not because our kids are more violent, it's not because our kids are worse, is because kids in Hartford have experienced a lot more trauma, and kids in Hartford have experienced a lot more poverty. And if we don't deal with the root causes of violence, we're going to continue to be back here every 10 years, every 20 years, talking about this ongoing system of violence every summer. And I want to take a really urgent approach to dealing with the root causes that lead to violence in our communities.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? When you talk about the youth specifically and their voices and them being exposed to more of the risk factors, let's talk a little bit more about that. How do you, again, when you were talking about redistribution of wealth and resources, how specifically is your campaign and your team going to work collaboratively with the people and the residents of the North End to reallocate wealth? Because essentially that's what they're fighting for, right? Some type of resource.
Around violence prevention specifically? Well, I think I need as many community members as possible involved in the planning and the momentum behind dealing with violence and getting ahead of violence in our community. And so, in creating this idea of these community hubs that can be centers for communities, for kids to have productive ways to engage, I would like to put together a youth cabinet to help plan that out. And I'd like to get neighborhood involvement in encouraging that resource, in volunteering to coach teams, coach soccer teams, basketball teams, football teams, to teach music in our schools, to keep kids engaged and to rebuild the sense of village, of a community. And I think that the neighborhood is really important in trying to find the resources for that as well. It has always struck me that Hartford has this unique advantage in that we sit in the capital city for our state, and the state capital is pretty close to all of us. And if we were organized throughout our city, if we could agree on priorities, and I've said that one of my priorities will be keeping our schools open, I think that from having a number of conversations with people in our communities across the city of Hartford, that's something that a lot of people can resonate on. And if we can if we can have community meetings across our city and agree on a set of legislative priorities together, instead of that being a kind of negotiated thing between big politicians behind closed doors, if we agree on what our legislative priorities are for the city of Hartford together and could go as a city and lobby the state capitol together, I think we could have a huge impact. I mean, we have enough people in the city that if they feel engaged and bought into a system, could pack a state capitol, could talk to every single legislator up there and shut down the governor's office and say, we need resources for violence prevention. If you're not going to give us those resources, then don't complain this summer. Don't bring your news cameras around and talk about how Hartford's a violent city. We need those resources now, and you could do something about it now. And I need the community to be at the table for that. I would be a weaker mayor if I don't have the community backing that up. And so I think that's a collaborative effort to me, that both the input from the community on how that should look and what that should be like, but also the advocacy from the community working hand in hand with City Hall to say, look, the state needs to step up here. The federal government needs to step up here and help out communities like Hartford, whether it's violence, whether it's flooding in the North End, whether it's our education system. We need the resources to be successful, and we need each of our community members to help us get there.
There's so many different ways I want to go with that, but I'm going to go back a little bit. You talked about wanting to keep the schools open in the evenings and maybe throughout the summers. How will you support monetarily teachers and people that come in to support these students?
Yeah, I mean, a few ideas. One, I don't think that extending the school day means that kids necessarily need more instruction. I think that kids reach this point, having young kids I know, where they are done with school.
Yes.
And so you can't put kids in a classroom until 7 o'clock and expect them to learn anything more than you've taught them before that. And so I would rely a lot on folks who could coach sports teams, folks who could teach music or arts or It'd be cool to have a journalism program after school in some of these schools or over the summer. The other thing is, I've had along the course of this run a number of conversations with members of the corporate community, and one of the things that they have said is that oftentimes the city asks for things as kind of scattershot. Asks for to fund this one thing, to fund this event downtown, to fund this development, fund this thing. But if you had one big priority as a city and you asked us to step up in a big way, then collaboratively the corporate community might step up in a bigger way. And for me, and this couldn't in the long run be fully funded by private contributions, but at least to get it started, I would ask the corporate community if they would both kick in funds and also ask their employees to help volunteer to make this a successful thing, to create spaces that we could open up so that by the summer of 2024, every kid has a place to go across the city of Hartford. And then to help us lobby, be there at the table with us when we lobby the state to say this is a priority, not just for residents, but for all of the stakeholders in the city of Hartford. And both our residents and our business community, we're hand in hand asking the state to step up and to help fund these safe spaces for kids.
Definitely. What do you say to people across the lines, those that don't necessarily agree with some of the things that you stand on, but how can you encourage them to want to vote?
People in the city of Hartford who...
So let me rephrase.
Yeah.
So a lot of my peers and those that are youth don't necessarily think that they have a voice or that it matters.
Yeah.
But historically we know that it does.
Yeah.
So how would you encourage those that do not believe that their vote matters?
I think that you can't tell people they're wrong. You gotta show them a different way. So one of the things we're doing on our campaign is we talked about this a moment ago. We're trying to get each of our supporters to identify the people within their network who can vote and to get them out to vote. Because I think sometimes having somebody else you already have a relationship with is a lot more powerful. Having them reach out to you is a lot more powerful than seeing a TV ad or getting a piece of mail or getting a call from somebody random. And so we're trying to engage every single one of our supporters to say, look, you've got your own network of people, and we'll help you identify it, and we'll sit down with you, but we want to turn our supporters into organizers and get them to organize their own networks of people. And I think it's incredibly powerful, because if you can see in an election where there are going to be 9,000 people who will probably turn up and vote, if you can see, hey, I can get 20 people to the polls, I can get 30 people to the polls, and that has a huge impact on who our next mayor is, that has a huge impact on what the next 4 years in this city look like, then my hope is that individually, one by one, people start to feel powerful in the city, because human beings in the city have so much power. The people in the city have so much power to change the systems around them and what it looks like, what this system looks like. And my hope is that if we can empower one supporter at a time, that then they show their friends how much power they can have.
What sets you apart from the other candidates?
I think one, I have real executive leadership experience. Before running the land bank, I was deputy commissioner of a state agency, and so I had about 220 employees under me and helped manage an agency with $50 million in revenue, and so I feel like I'm ready to lead on day one. But the bigger thing to me is there are folks who have a lot more years of experience than I do. But I think Hartford has to figure out who we are going to be in the future. And my hope is that I can convey a real message, a real vision for the future, real hope for what we can be if we are willing to open our minds and dream about what Hartford could be. If we could dream about Hartford not going down the same path of other cities our size, but really building around this idea of Hartford being a black and brown Wall Street, of building the kind of wealth that allows for real generational wealth in our city, and also real reimagining of growth and economic development that is centered around the families that are already here in Hartford. And I hope that this campaign is not just about me getting to a specific office or being in a specific seat, not just about one person, but it's about what we can imagine together as a city and how much people are willing to open up and dream and build vision around who Hartford can be.
Definitely. So, thank you. I want to go back a little bit. I told you I'm a North End girl.
Yeah.
Westbrook Village, right by the train tracks.
Mm-hmm.
I lived there for 10 years. So when you talk about dreaming and envisioning and reimagining, I am one of those youth that dreamed and believed that I was more than what surrounded me. And school and arts allowed me to do that. So what are your thoughts? And in that, I say that to ask you, what are your thoughts on the school to prison pipeline? Because while I was dreaming and pretending, there were a whole bunch of my classmates that did not have the same opportunities that I did. And working in where I work now, I realized that. So it took me into adulthood to realize that while they were saying no child left behind, a lot of the children were left behind.
Yeah.
So, thoughts on school to prison pipeline?
Yeah, I think the place where you started was so beautiful too, about how art kind of helped pull you into that world. And I think that one of the mistakes we make too often with urban education is we think of it as conveying a certain set of information to children instead of being able to allow children to flourish into the incredible beings that they are. And we have cut back so much in the city of Hartford on art programs, on music programs. You know, we've lost visual art teachers. We've lost music art teachers. I think there's only one high school in the entire city that's got a band program. And even if you're just thinking about it in terms of getting kids to college, like how many band scholarships HBCUs have in this country? We're missing out on our kids are missing out on a whole lot of opportunities because of that. But I think that it's indicative of something larger, which is that urban education for decades has been focused on getting a specific set of skills into students, as opposed to thinking about who that student's going to be and educating that student as a person, just like you would for students who grow up anywhere else. And there are barriers to that education, and I think that the load of trauma that students feel, that Hartford kids feel, just walking into the classroom is one of those barriers. I think that the social issues around each one of our kids are one of those issues, but our kids don't have any less potential than kids who grow up anywhere else. And our education system isn't designed as if it believes that truth. And I think that having the full range of education that includes arts, that includes, that includes all sorts of, poetry, and that includes also, some pathways that may not lead to college, but may lead to real careers in the skills trade, and just training kids to grow up and have a whole set of skills, as opposed to being able to take tests well in a way that conveys to adults that there's some sort of better educational achievement, specifically in a set of science and math and language classes, is where we should be fundamentally. And I think that is the beginning point of that school to prison pipeline, because we're not setting our kids up to be their best selves. We're not setting them up to build careers in so many of the ways in which people can build real good careers, solid middle class lives. And then after they fail, we're not setting them up to be able to reestablish themselves back in the community. And at each step of the way, I think we assume a certain set of failure before we engage with kids. And so, both in the level of the kind of punitive nature of the education system, and then the punitive nature of the world that we've established just beyond the educational system, I think we've set up a lot of kids to fail.
How do we help those children? And families, how do we help the whole community?
Yeah. I'll say a few things. I think there's no one answer, and frankly, I don't think there's 3 or 4 answers, but I'll give you a few. One is better education systems, education systems that are meant to educate the full child and to make them aware, like you were, of the full range of possibilities and their full range of capabilities that sets kids up to succeed. One is by being really on top of re-engaging returning citizens back into society, by helping them actively create pathways to jobs, by making sure that they're connected to community, and by being there for them, by showing up for them. And the other thing I'll say is I think in the long run, building opportunities for more invested in communities. I think that the way in which we, you go around the north end of Hartford, and it always strikes me that if you get past Samia over there on Main Street, there's not a single independently owned coffee shop. There aren't really sit-down restaurants in the north end of Hartford. I mean, that entire area is not treated like a community.
No,
it's treated like a place that you house poor people, and it should bother every one of us. And dealing with the small things, the trash, and the noise, and the rodents that convey a sense of lack of dignity to human beings, and dealing with the larger investments on places like Albany Ave and Upper Main Street and Barber Street, so that people feel like they're part of communities where they can walk to a coffee shop and sit down and talk to people in their community, and or have a drink with somebody at night over a nice meal. Like those basic investments, I think, convey so much to our residents about what our communities are about. And so there's no, I don't know that there's a silver bullet, but I think that we need to build the kind of dignified communities that everybody deserves in every part of this world, but especially in the north end of Hartford.
Yes. It's hard though when you have a single mother that's working 2 and 3 jobs. So I guess it kind of goes back to what you were saying as far as, making sure that your constituents give back to the community and more opportunities as far as jobs can go back into the north end.
Yeah.
Because one thing is for sure, we can spend some money, but when you look at all the other areas around Hartford, you see how in different administrations, specific people built up their specific parts of the city. What are your plans for the north end?
Well, I'll be specific. I think one of my first areas that I love to focus on is Albany Woodland, and getting that undeveloped parcel there rebuilt. The community has been asking for a jazz club for a while, or something similar. And I think, you've got the Artist Collective there, which has really struggled in the last few years, but is this incredible cultural institution, and the history of this. But the fact that Jackie McLean was in Hartford and helped build that Artist Collective there, it's a treasure. And then, the Hartford Public Library is renovating that old Johnny Rogers Museum space. I would love to invest in building an arts community that is a center for Black arts in the region, up in Albany Woodland, to get a band shell at the bottom of Keeney Park there at the Woodland Street entrance, and see if I could get the first night of Jazz Fest there, and maybe every now and then a Monday night jazz there, and build around the arts that are already authentically so rich and deep in the north end of Hartford, but just we haven't made the investments, with the exception of the Artist Collective, into the spaces for those arts to flourish and thrive. And I think we could build around economic development in the arts coming out of that intersection. I'd like to put some investment into building around all of the rich culture of the Caribbean community, especially on Upper Main Street there. We've You've got the social clubs that are really kind of the only place you can get a drink in most of the north end of Hartford, and so important to the culture and the history of so many of the diasporic communities that are in the north end. And I'd love to build some investment around that. You've probably know all about the Barber Street Renaissance project, but bringing back Barber Street, which folks who are in their 70s and 80s who live in the north end talk about as being like a black Mecca at one point, is really important to me. So bringing back those commercial corridors, really making significant investments in housing and especially in home ownership, that allows for families in the north end of Hartford to own homes and to build generational wealth is really important to me. And I'm through my time as a land bank, I've been pretty actively on the ground, all the time in the north end. It's a community that I feel really at home at, and I'm the mayor who really wants to be involved day to day and be accessible to folks in the north end. You don't have to come down to City Hall or go to a town hall meeting. And you shouldn't have to in a city this size to meet the mayor. Like, the mayor should be at Sisters and at Dunn's River and going to stuff at the library and at Keeney Park, and I'd plan to be a really active presence in the north end.
So I'm a mental health counselor.
Yeah.
I have my licensure in New York, but this specific bill, which they submitted, was mental health professionals can have access to work without rest or undue process or whatever, without having to go through all the different channels statewide, right? But it wasn't passed because the Democrats and the Republicans could not come to a peace treaty or whatever,
right,
or understanding. So how will you work across the lines with your constituents?
I would love to know more about that bill, and would love to talk about it offline. I think mental health care is so important in a city like Hartford. And I started off by saying, or at least earlier I said, residents in our city bear a disproportionate share of trauma, and I think that impacts our violence in the city. I think that impacts our ability to learn, for kids to learn in the city. I think it impacts the joblessness in the city. There's so many layers to that impact, and we really need mental health resources in the city of Hartford, and it's something that I think the mayor can have a really important role in advocating for, and I plan to. But it's also something that I would love to see integrated into our school system, integrated into engagement with young families, integrated really in as many arenas as possible, because it is that mental health care is so important to healing and coming together as a city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate you, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining me for this conversation with Arunan. And remember, the date to vote is September 12th in the primaries. Make sure you get out there and get your voice heard.
With great power comes responsibility. Do whatever that you want to your best ability, and there is nothing that's impossible with possibility. I am possibly the hero that nobody knew they